The first night I noticed the silence break was when the wind stopped touching the trees. That never happens up here. Wind always moves, even when snow falls straight down. I stood on the porch of my cabin at Alder Creek Pass, rifle resting against the doorframe, and felt watched, not imagined, watched. The kind of pressure you feel between your shoulder blades when something has already chosen you. At dawn, I found the tracks. Large, clean. A mountain lion's prints circled the cabin once, wide and patient. No rush, no confusion. He wasn't hunting, he was learning. I followed the trail only 10 yards before stopping. I knew better. Predators don't like to be followed, and this one had already decided where I slept. The second night was worse. No sounds at all. No owls, no mice. Even the creek below Alder Ridge went quiet. I sat inside with the lamp off, counting seconds between heartbeats. Around midnight, I smelled him. Sharp, musky, close. The window on the east wall fogged from breath that wasn't mine. I didn't reach for the rifle. I reached for the lantern. Light matters to animals. It tells them what you are. When I raised it, I saw movement slide past the edge of the clearing. Low, smooth, confident. The puma stayed just beyond the firelight, where fear grows best. Morning showed me what he wanted me to see. A mule deer lay 50 yards from the cabin, throat crushed clean. No feeding marks, just a message. He could kill near me whenever he chose. I buried the deer with effort, sweat freezing on my back, knowing he watched every move. That afternoon, I reinforced the door, stacked fresh wood, and moved nothing else. Change signals weakness. I'd learned that years ago in places worse than this mountain. The cabin stayed as it was. So did I. The third night came heavy with clouds. Snow started late, thick and slow. Near 2 a.m., I heard the scrape. Claws on wood, not aggressive, curious. He was on the porch now. I stepped outside, lantern in one hand, nothing in the other. The puma stood 10 feet away, eyes reflecting pale gold. We locked in place, no sound, no motion, just two predators deciding how this would end. My name is Elias Crowe. I live alone beyond Alder Creek Pass, where the timber thins and the mountain decides who stays. There are no neighbors here, no second opinions, and no help coming if something goes wrong. Every sound has a reason. Every silence carries weight. What you're about to hear took place over 3 winter nights, deep in the high country near Alder Ridge. No witnesses, no signal, just a man, a cabin, and a predator that chose patience over speed. I'm telling this story the way it unfolded, clean, direct, and without embellishment. If stories grounded in real wilderness encounters, survival, and quiet danger interest you, subscribe to the channel now. These aren't tales built for comfort. They come from isolation, cold decisions, and moments where control matters more than strength. Before the story continues, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. City or forest, coast or desert, another country or another mountain. Let me know how far beyond this ridge these words are reaching. This story is told in 5 chapters, followed by a closing I didn't understand until much later. No philosophy, no lessons forced, just events as they happened. This is what occurred when a puma decided to observe me instead of attack. The first sign wasn't sound, it was absence. When I stepped outside the cabin just before dusk, the forest felt hollow, like something had pulled the breath out of it. No birds settling, no wind in the pines. Even the creek below Alder Creek Pass lost its usual chatter. I stood still long enough to feel the cold soak through my boots, and that was when I knew I wasn't alone. I circled the cabin once, slow, boots crunching lightly in old snow. Near the woodpile, I found the prints. Big pads, deep impressions, a puma, fresh, close. He hadn't crossed straight through, he'd looped, wide and deliberate, mapping the place where I slept. That wasn't hunger, that was evaluation. I followed the tracks for 6 steps and stopped. Following was how men got tested. Inside, I barred the door and let the cabin go dark. Light makes you visible. Darkness makes you honest. I sat at the small table, back to the wall, listening. Time stretched. Every second felt counted. I didn't reach for the rifle leaning near the stove. A weapon changes your posture, and posture tells a predator everything it needs to know. Sometime after midnight, the smell hit me. Sharp, wild, like wet fur and iron. It came through the cracks in the logs, faint, but undeniable. My pulse stayed slow, but my body tightened. He was close enough to smell me too. That meant he'd already crossed the clearing without sound. I hadn't heard a single step. I eased the shutter open, a finger's width. Moonlight washed the snow in pale silver. At the edge of the tree line, something shifted. Low to the ground, smooth, controlled. The puma didn't step into the open. He didn't need to. He stayed where shadows did the work for him, watching to see if I would make a mistake. I closed the shutter and waited. Waiting is a language animals understand. I stood there until my legs burned, until the cold chewed at my hands, until the smell faded. When I finally sat, I didn't sleep. Sleep is surrender. Instead, I listened to my own breathing and kept it steady, the way I'd learned long before these mountains. Morning came gray and heavy. Outside, the tracks were clearer now. He'd walked the perimeter twice. On the second pass, he'd stopped at the porch. Claws had scored the frozen wood, light but deliberate. Not an attack, a reminder. I knelt there longer than I should have, palm hovering over the marks. I spent the day doing nothing unusual. Same routine, same paths. I split wood where I always did, kept my back to open ground, and never rushed. Predators notice change. When you move differently, you announce fear. I refused to give him that satisfaction. By late afternoon, clouds rolled over Alder Ridge, thick with snow. As light drained from the sky, the pressure returned. Not panic, not dread. Something colder. The certainty that the second night would be closer. He had learned where I lived. Now he wanted to learn who I was. The second night began before the sun was fully gone. Shadows stretched too long across the clearing, bending where they shouldn't. I cooked in silence, chewing without appetite, every sense tuned outward. When darkness settled over Alder Creek Pass, it felt deliberate, as if the mountain itself was holding still. I left the lantern unlit and sat near the window that faced the tree line. My eyes adjusted slowly. Shapes formed, broke apart, reformed. I counted breaths, not minutes. Outside, the forest stayed wrong. No insects, no wind. Even the snow waited to fall, hanging in the air without committing. Near 10, I heard it. Not a step, a shift, snow compressing under weight, then stopping. He was testing sound, measuring distance. I didn't move. Muscles can lie, stillness can't. The pressure in my chest tightened, but my breathing stayed even. The smell came stronger than the night before, musky and warm, carried by a current I couldn't feel on my skin. He was closer now. Close enough that he knew the shape of the cabin, the position of the windows, the height of the porch. Predators don't rush what they can study. Something passed in front of the east window, blotting out the faint starlight. Broad shoulders, a tail sliding low. He moved like water poured along the ground. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to track him. Direct attention can trigger action. Indifference can buy time. Minutes later, the sound of breathing reached me. Slow, controlled, not strained. He wasn't excited. He wasn't hungry. He was curious. The worst state a predator can be in. I shifted my weight a fraction, just enough to ease the burn in my legs. The breathing paused, then resumed. He noticed everything. After midnight, snow finally started to fall. Thick flakes muted the world, covering sound and scent. That was when he climbed onto the porch. The boards creaked once under his weight, then went still. Claws brushed wood, light and careful, tracing the grain. He was learning the structure, the way a man learns a door. I stood and lifted the lantern, not lighting it yet. I wanted him to hear me move. Movement without panic. When I struck the match and raised the flame, light spilled through the cracks in the door and across the porch. His silhouette appeared on the wall. Tall, powerful, perfectly balanced. I opened the door just enough to let the light fall outward. The puma stood at the edge of the porch, eyes reflecting dull gold. He didn't retreat. He didn't advance. We held that distance for several breaths before he turned and vanished into the snowfall without sound. Dawn revealed what he'd left behind. A mule deer lay downhill from the cabin, throat crushed, body untouched. A clean kill, a statement. I dragged it away with effort, knowing he watched from somewhere I couldn't see. The second night had ended. The test was not over. The third day carried a weight the others hadn't. The air felt tighter, like the mountain was bracing. I woke before light, already alert, already aware that the distance between me and the puma was gone. He wasn't circling anymore. He had chosen proximity. I found new tracks near the tree line, overlapping my own from the morning before. He'd followed me after I returned inside, walked where I walked, stopped where I stopped. That wasn't curiosity. That was rehearsal. I erased nothing, covering signs, insults a predator. I let the prints remain, a quiet acknowledgement. By afternoon, clouds swallowed Alder Ridge. Snow began early, thick and heavy, cutting visibility down to yards. Sound vanished with it. I split wood slower than usual, listening between each strike. Twice I felt movement just beyond sight. Twice I turned and saw nothing. Being seen without seeing back is how pressure builds. Night fell hard. The cabin seemed smaller, the walls closer. I didn't eat. I didn't sit. I stood near the center of the room, keeping distance from windows and corners. Corners trap. Open space gives options. My breath fogged faintly in the cold, steady and controlled. Just after midnight, the scrape came. Not careful this time. Claws dragged across the porch boards, heavier, longer. The sound traveled through the logs and into my bones. He wanted me to know where he was. Silence had done its work. Now He changed tactics. The door shuddered once. Not a strike. A push. Testing resistance. I didn't raise the rifle. A weapon invites escalation. Instead, I stepped forward and placed my hand flat against the door from the inside. Wood between us. Pressure on pressure. My pulse stayed slow. The breathing came again, closer than before. I could hear it through the door. Deep, calm, confident. He wasn't deciding whether to attack. He was deciding whether I was worth it. I slid the bolt back, unlocked the door, and lifted the lantern. When I stepped onto the porch, snow fell thick around us. The puma stood less than 10 feet away, body low, muscles bunched, eyes fixed on mine. No retreat this time, no shadows to hide in. The third night had reached its edge. The lantern light settled between us, steady in my hand. Snow drifted through the beam, slow and quiet. But neither of us moved. The puma stayed low, tail barely touching the boards, shoulders rolled forward. Every part of him was prepared. I stood upright, feet planted, giving him my full outline. No crouching, no tension. I let him see exactly what I was. His eyes didn't blink. They tracked my chest, my hands, my stance. Predator's red balance first. I kept mine centered, weight even, breathing slow. The rifle remained inside the cabin, untouched. Distance was the only thing keeping this moment intact, and I wasn't going to break it by reaching for something I didn't need. He stepped closer. One pat on wood, then another. The porch creaked under his weight, a sound that cut clean through the night. He stopped just outside the lantern's brightest edge, where light thinned and shadows still worked in his favor. I didn't retreat. Retreat invites pursuit. I held. The smell was overwhelming now. Fur, blood, cold air dragged through lungs built for killing. My body reacted despite discipline, muscles tight, vision sharp, every instinct awake. Fear was there, but contained. Fear without control is weakness. Fear managed is clarity. He lifted his head slightly, eyes locking fully with mine. This wasn't a challenge. It was assessment at the final distance. I raised the lantern higher, widening the circle of light, erasing the last hiding place between us. He flicked an ear, a small sign, not anger, calculation. For several seconds, nothing existed beyond that space. Snow, wood, breath. I became aware of how still I was, how little I needed to do. Presence mattered more than movement. Sound mattered more than strength. The mountain seemed to wait with us. Then he did something unexpected. He sat back on his haunches, not relaxed, not submissive, balanced, watching. The tension didn't break, but it shifted. He wasn't deciding whether to kill anymore. He was deciding whether I belonged. I lowered the lantern just enough to soften the light, not to threaten, not to retreat. My eyes stayed on his. When he finally turned his head away, just slightly, it was deliberate. He stood, stepped off the porch, and vanished into the snow without a sound. The decision had been made. The silence after he left was heavier than his presence. I stood on the porch long after the snow swallowed his shape, lantern still burning, listening for the sound that didn't come. No retreating steps, no brush breaking, just absence. That was how I knew it was over. I didn't follow. Victory doesn't need confirmation. I closed the door, slid the bolt into place, and set the lantern on the table. My hands were steady. The cabin felt the same as it always had, but I knew something fundamental had shifted. The line had been drawn, and then erased. Sleep came in pieces, short, shallow stretches broken by awareness. At first light, I stepped outside. Fresh snow covered everything except one place. At the edge of the clearing, his tracks stopped, not turned, not circled, stopped. He had stood there, made his choice, and gone another way. The forest began to breathe again. Birds returned cautiously. The creek resumed its low chatter. Life didn't rush back. It tested the air first, the way animals do after danger passes. I moved through the morning without hurry, letting the mountain reset on its own terms. I found no more signs that day. No tracks, no kills, no pressure at my back. The puma had taken his presence with him, and I knew he wouldn't return. Encounters like that don't repeat. They resolve. By evening, the cabin felt larger, not safer, just honest again. I cooked, ate, and sat by the window without needing to watch the tree line. The cold settled in, familiar and manageable. The mountain had finished asking its question. Days passed, then weeks. Snow deepened, tracks layered over tracks. The memory stayed sharp, but the threat did not. Whatever boundary had been tested held firm. Somewhere beyond Alder Ridge, the puma still moved through his territory, silent and unseen. And here, at Alder Creek Pass, I remained. Two predators had measured each other in the dark. Only one stayed. I didn't tell anyone about what happened at Alder Creek Pass when it was over. Not because it sounded unbelievable, but because it didn't need witnesses. The mountain had been there. The snow had been there. And the puma had been there long enough to make his decision. That was enough. Some encounters aren't meant to be shared immediately. They settle first. What stayed with me wasn't the fear or the tension. It was the precision of it. Nothing was wasted. No movement without purpose. No sound without meaning. The puma didn't fail, and neither did I. We reached the edge of violence and stopped there. That line matters more than people think. It's where control proves itself. I still walk the same paths near Alder Ridge. I still split wood at the same spot, keep the same routines, and leave the forest as I find it. The land remembers behavior. So do animals. When you show consistency, you become part of the pattern instead of a disruption. That's how you last in places like this. If you stayed until the end, subscribe to the channel and share this story with someone who understands silence. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. City, forest, or somewhere in between. Out here, distance doesn't erase truth. This was Elias Crowe. And this is how the mountain answered when it tested me.